everyone and welcome to the 8th video on life on Earth. You should now know all about food production and you should be able to pause the video and answer the questions before I go over them. So the questions are: what do plants use nitrates for? Which of the following statements describes the sequence of events when fertilizers leach into a loch? What is the word used for when a pesticide builds up in a living organism, and what is an alternative to using pesticides? So the answers would be that nitrates are used to make amino acids and proteins. For the next one, the sequence of events when fertilizers leach into a loch would be that your algal bloom develops first of all, so it's either going to be this one or this one. Your algae die, and then your oxygen concentration decreases because there's an increase in bacteria, so the answer would be B. And then the word used to describe the pesticides building up in a living organism is bioaccumulation, and the alternative to using pesticides would be either biological control or GM crops. So well done if you managed to get that correct. If you struggled to get the answers, remember you can go back and watch the last video again, or the parts of the last video again that you were struggling with as many times as you want. So today we're going to learn about key area 6, which is evolution of a species, and first we're going to look at mutations and adaptations. If you want the worksheets to go with the video, remember to pause the video and go to Free Life on Earth 6, Evolution and Species 2, Consumables and Activities. The PowerPoint is found in PowerPoint and is called 6, Evolution of Species. So today we're going to be learning about mutations and adaptation. Our learning intention is to state what a mutation is, so that a mutation is a random change to genetic material. Mutations may be neutral, confer an advantage or a disadvantage to survival. Mutations are spontaneous and they are the only source of new alleles. You need to be able to explain that environmental factors such as radiation and some chemicals can increase the rate of mutation. You need to be able to describe that new alleles produced by mutations can result in the plants and animals becoming better adapted to their environment. And you need to be able to state that variation within a population makes it possible for the population to evolve over time in response to changing environmental conditions. So to be successful, you will be able to explain what a mutation is, identify the different types of mutation, describe what increases the risk of mutation, describe different adaptations, and explain how it helps species survive. Firstly, pause the video and write down what you think variation is and what causes it before I go over the answers. So variation is the difference between members of the same species. So, for example, if you look around at your classmates, you don't all look the same. You have different characteristics, like you have different eye colours, hair colours, etc. These are all caused by variation. But what causes this variation? So what is this thing called mutation that we've been talking about, and what causes mutations? So pause the video and write down what you think they are before I go over the answer. So a mutation is a random change to genetic material, and you need to make sure that you know the definition of mutation, so write it out loads of times and make sure you know it. So mutation is a random change to genetic material. Mutations are spontaneous and they are the only source of new alleles. So remember, alleles are different forms of a gene, and this is what causes variation. And finally, a mutant is an organism that displays the genotypic mutation in its phenotype. So make sure you know the words mutation and you know the word mutant. So make sure basically you know this whole part of the video before you move on to the next part, so you can write it out over and over again or say it over and over again. So remember, mutations are usually random, spontaneous, and occur very rarely. So we need to know they're random, spontaneous, and occur rarely. So remember to learn that part too. Some things can speed up the rate of mutations. These are called mutagenic agents. So mutagenic agents are defined as an environmental factor that will increase the rate of mutation. There are two categories of mutagenic agents, which are chemical and radiation. So chemical mutagenic agent examples are mustard gas, which is the yellow gas that they used in the war that attacks your lungs. There's collocaine, there's caffeine, which you find in your coffee, and there's formaldehyde. Radiation mutagenic agents are different, so they are X-rays, UV light, which you get from the sun, and gamma rays. So make sure you pause the video and learn the definition of mutagenic agent, and also know the two different categories of them, and know an example for each category before you move on to the next part of the video. So mutagenic agents speed up the rate of mutations. There's two categories, chemicals and radiation, and you have to remember that an example of a chemical one, for example, would be mustard gas, and an example of a radiation mutagenic agent would be X-rays. An example of what a radiation mutagenic agent can do is like of the case of Chernobyl. So there's a series about Chernobyl, but basically in 1986 in Ukraine, a reactor exploded and caused a nuclear accident to occur. So this led to lots of radiation being released, and some people died that were too near the radiation and exposed to too high levels. But other people that were exposed to lower levels, their children now have birthing defects. So you can see some of these birthing defects from the pictures. So that's what can happen if mutations are sped up to that degree. So if mutations occur during the copying of normal body cells for growth and repair, this may cause cancer. So you can get skin cancer, which there's a picture of. But if mutations occur during the formation of sex cells, so that would be your sperm and your egg, the mutation may be passed on to the offspring, and will give you the characteristics of the offspring having the mutation. So that was like in the Chernobyl pictures. So mutations can be either advantageous, disadvantageous, or neutral. So if they're advantageous for the organism, the mutation has caused the mutant to be better than the original organism. So for example, a polyploidy plant makes strawberries bigger. So it's basically a new source of variation. A disadvantage mutation is when the organism is harmed by the mutation. So for example, diseases such as cystic fibrosis and sickle cell anemia would be disadvantageous mutations. And then you get neutral mutations. So the mutation causes no change to the organism. It is neither beneficial or harmful. So let's look at some of these in more detail. Most mutations that occur are unfortunately disadvantageous and harmful. So they disrupt the proper working of cells. An example of the effects of a mutation in humans is Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is a condition that is characterized by slow growth, abnormal facial features, and mental retardation. It is caused by an extra chromosome at chromosome 21. The incidence of Down syndrome is estimated at 1 per 660 births, making it the most common chromosomal abnormality. So the incidence of Down syndrome increases with the age of the mother. So the older you are when you have the baby, the more likely you are to have a child with Down syndrome. So you can test your child to see if they're going to have any of these chromosome abnormalities. So you do this by a test called amniocentesis. So this is where a sample of amniotic fluid is taken to detect chromosomal characteristics before birth. So it can detect Down syndrome. So here's the hollow needle being inserted through the mother's abdomen into the uterus and the amniotic fluid. So it's drawn for analysis. So then you will get a karyotype. So a person that has Down syndrome would have this karyotype. So they'd have an additional chromosome at position 21. So usually we would only have 2 chromosomes at location 21, but a person with Down syndrome has 3 chromosomes at 21. So then the mother would get the option of whether to keep the baby or to terminate the baby. A very few mutations are beneficial and they improve the survival chances. So without these mutations, species would just stay the same. There would be no survival of the fittest and no evolution. So the peppered moth is an example of this, which we will look into more detail in the next video. But basically, if it has a mutation with the colour that blends in with the tree, it can camouflage and is less likely to be seen by its predator, birds. So the one with the mutation that blends will confer the advantage for its survival. Another advantageous mutation is where fruit or crops have a complete extra set of chromosomes, and this can occur in strawberries, cereal crops, and it leads to bigger fruit size and an increased yield. So these plants are called polyploidy. So some mutations seem to be neutral, they don't seem to confer an advantage or disadvantage on the organism in which they occur. So on Fair Isle, an island with no land predators between Orkney and Shetland, all of these different colours of rabbits occur. Why are almost all of the rabbits brown on the mainland? So pause the video and try to come up with an answer for that. And the answer would be that they are brown so that they can camouflage, so that they can better hide from predators. And it says, any ideas on why there might be lots of black rabbits near the old Francis pit? So have a think of why it would be advantageous for the black rabbits near there. Well done if you managed to think or say that it's because the black rabbits would be able to camouflage and beside the old Francis pit heath, as it would be dark, so they're less likely to be eaten by predators. We need to know that mutations are our only source of variation. So new alleles produced by mutation can result in plants and animals becoming better adapted to their environment. Variation within a population makes it possible for a population to evolve over time in response to changing environmental conditions. So pause this and make sure you learn it before you move on to the next part of the video. So we should know all about adaptations from Bergier. So an adaptation is an inherited characteristic that makes an organism well suited to survival in its environment / niche. Remember, niche is the role that it plays. So you get three types of adaptation, which you should already know. So you get your structural adaptation, which is changes in the body part that helps an animal survive. So this is like having a hump on your back to store extra fat like a camel does. Psychological changes is the way that the body functions. So for example, like a plant secreting pheromones to attract insects. And finally, behavioural changes. So this is how an organism reacts to its environment. So like choosing to be nocturnal, so when an organism is only active at night. Pause the video and copy down the table so we can look up some organisms' adaptations and how they might help an organism survive. So let's look at the cactus first of all. So cactuses live in the desert, which is very hot and dry conditions. So they have to have structural adaptations which are going to prevent water loss. So they have succulent tissue, waxy cuticles, spines, and deep root or superficial roots so that they can store water and it reduces water loss. The next one we're going to look at is the desert kangaroo rat. This also lives in the desert, which remember is very hot and dry conditions. So the desert kangaroo rat has the behavioural adaptations where it is active at night because it's cooler and it sleeps in a burrow through the day. It also has structural adaptations where it does not sweat, it has a long intestine, it's got kidney tubules which are long, which promote water reabsorption, it has a dry mouth and nasal passage so it can store water. And it also has physiological adaptations where it has a high concentration of ADH, which is a hormone in its blood, which also helps it to preserve water. So all of these things help the desert kangaroo rat to preserve water. And the camel has stretchy nostrils to keep sand out of its nose. It's got long eyelashes to help keep sand out of its eyes. It's got hair on its back to protect it against the sun. It's got a hump for storing fat. It's got a leathery mouth to help it eat spiky plants. It's got long legs to keep the hot sand away from its body. And it's got padded feet to stop it sticking into the sand and to protect it from heat of the ground. I've also put at the bottom a camel adaptation song, which you can click the link and listen to. If you want to look at these organisms in more detail, you can look at the James Torrance book on page 179 to 181. So you should have your table, so now try to fill in an adaptation and its survival value for the cactus, the kangaroo rat and the camel. So I've just made a little summary note and we'll go over the answers with you. So the answers would be cactuses have succulent tissue, waxy cuticles, spines, and deep roots or superficial roots. And their survival value is it reduces water loss. Kangaroo rat is active at night. It does not sweat. It's got a long intestine, high concentration of ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone, in the blood. It's got long kidney tubules to promote water reabsorption, a dry mouth, and a dry nasal passage. And again, this reduces water loss. The camel has a hump for storing fat. It's got leathery mouth, padded feet, long eyelashes, and stretchy nostrils. So its survival value is it reduces water loss and it allows it to live on the sand and eat desert plants. Common SQA question that gets asked a lot is usually about finches. So we need to know all about the Galapagos finches that Darwin studied. So many species of finch exist on the Galapagos Islands today. Their beaks are different shapes and sizes. So how did so many different species of finch arise? So Darwin wondered the same thing and tried to find an answer for this. The Galapagos Islands lie west of South America in the Pacific Ocean. On these islands live 13 different species of finch. In order to survive, each finch species has adapted to occupy a particular niche, so role, and this is what Darwin found out. Finches are different and adapt to their environment because they have different beak shapes and different beak sizes, and they have different habitats and different niches, so different roles. So pause the video and try to answer the question. So the question is, can you think which finch lives near bark containing burrowing insects, and which finch lives on the ground near trees that produce thick-walled seeds? And a clue is to have a look at the pictures and compare their beaks. So the answer would be that these different beak adaptations make the species well suited to its environment by enabling it to exploit a particular ecological niche. So for example, the insect-eating warbler finch has a small, sharp, pointed beak that is ideal for picking insects out of narrow crevices in the bark of a tree. So well done if you managed to get that. It's because it had a small, sharp, pointed beak. And the seed-eating ground finch's large, blunt beak, on the other hand, is well suited to breaking up tough coats surrounding seeds and nuts. Well done if you managed to get the different finch types because of their different beaks and how it would be useful for what they eat. Look at all the different finches. Their beaks help them to eat their food. Since all of the different species of finch have different beaks and can eat different foods, this reduces competition and increases their chance of survival because they have different roles and can live in different habitats because they eat different things. Here is another picture of the finches with their different beaks and their different food sources. Let's see if we can review our learning and answer this SQA question, which says, the diagrams below give some information about 3 species of Darwin's finches which live on the Galapagos Islands. So you've got feeds on insects, feeds on seeds, feeds on seeds. Using evidence from the diagrams, explain why these 3 finch species occupy different niches. And then B, some areas on the island have a thin layer of soil and low rainfall. Describe 2 adaptations which plants growing in these areas will have to help them survive. So pause the video and try to put an answer before I go over the answer. So the answer is that the finches have different beak shapes and sizes or structures. So that's for 1 mark, and then your second mark is so that they have different food sources. Okay, so 1 mark to say about the beaks being different, so shapes, sizes, or structures, and the second mark to say that they have different food that they eat because of this. And then for the next question, the adaptations that the plant would have would be a waxy cuticle, spines, succulent tissue, and deep or superficial roots. So any 2 of them would have got your mark. Well done if you managed to get the last question correct. If you didn't manage to get them questions correct, go back and watch the video again. So we have now come to the end of the lesson, so you should now be able to explain what a mutation is, identify the different types of mutation, describe what increases the risk of mutations, describe different adaptations, and explain how it helps a species survive. Well done if you can confidently do all of that. If you can't, then you need to go back and watch this video again. That is the end of this video tutorial. Woohoo! Thank you for listening.